This happened a few years ago during what was supposed to be a simple 2-night camping trip to Cape Split in Nova Scotia. If you've ever been there, you know it's a popular hiking spot with an incredible view of the ocean. As a place to camp overnight, though, I don't think I'll ever do that again. It was a warm, clear day when my boyfriend at the time and I made the hike up. It took us about 2 hours, and the weather couldn't have been better. No clouds, just blue sky and a view that stretched forever once we reached the top. We lay down for a while, took everything in, and eventually started setting up camp. By the time dinner rolled around, the sun was starting to dip, and all the day hikers had cleared out. There was one other couple camped a short distance away, and aside from them, the place felt empty. At least, that's what we thought. Out of nowhere, a man appeared near our campsite. There was no sound of footsteps or movement beforehand. He was just suddenly there. What stood out immediately was how out of place he looked. He was dressed like he was headed to an office or maybe a golf course. Nice shoes, slacks, and a collared shirt. No backpack, no camping gear, nothing that suggested he'd been hiking all day. I remember feeling uneasy almost instantly, like my body picked up on something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. My boyfriend and I were trying to get a fire started, and I looked over at him, expecting some kind of reassurance. Instead, I saw the same concern on his face that I was feeling myself. That was when I knew this wasn't just nerves on my end. The man slowly walked closer until he was maybe 10 feet away. Behind him, just a short distance back, was the edge of the cliff. Without any small talk or introduction, the first thing he said was, "Did you hear about that group of friends that died recently?" I remember thinking how strange that was to lead with, especially given the setting. I answered no, trying to sound normal, while my boyfriend stayed silent. The man vaguely explained something about a car accident, but by then I wasn't really listening. I was focused on how close we were to the edge and how unprepared we were if things went sideways. Then, just as suddenly, he changed the subject and started talking about the bugs, saying it was going to rain overnight because of how they were out. He kept glancing back toward the cliff, which only made everything worse. After that, he said he was heading down to the water and walked off in that direction. I didn't even know there was an easy way down from where we were, especially with night approaching. A few minutes later, a kid appeared from the same direction the man had come from and followed after him. That confused us even more. Neither of them had camping gear, and the timing of it all felt off. Once we felt they were far enough away, my boyfriend and I went to find the other couple nearby and told them what had happened. They were kind about it and even offered to let us move our tent closer to theirs. We decided to stay put, but appreciated the gesture. They joked that they'd be sleeping with an axe, which honestly didn't feel like much of a joke at the time. We strongly considered hiking back down that night but talked ourselves out of it. The presence of the other couple helped, and the fact that the man had been with a kid made us doubt our worst thoughts. Later, while we were in our tent listening to the radio, a news segment came on about the deaths the man had mentioned earlier. That detail stuck with me more than anything else. I managed to sleep, but my boyfriend didn't. He stayed awake all night with an axe beside him. Just like the man predicted, it rained heavily through the night. By morning we were exhausted, but relieved to still be there. We didn't even consider staying the second night. As we finished breakfast, a massive thunderstorm rolled in, with lightning striking dangerously close. Being on the highest point with an old metal-framed backpack was enough to make the decision for us. We hiked down as fast as we safely could, soaked and muddy by the time we reached the bottom. Once we were down, the storm cleared, and new hikers were already heading up like nothing had happened. We never saw the man or the kid again. I haven't been back to Cape Split since. On the drive home, we stopped for chili at Wendy's and sat in the car trying to warm up. It felt like the first normal moment after a trip that went wrong in a way I still can't fully explain. I was 18 when this happened. One evening, me and two friends of mine, Mike and Paul, decided to head out for what we loosely called camping, even though none of us planned to stay the night. The idea was just to get out of town, start a fire, drink a couple bottles of wine, eat whatever food we brought, and head home before things got too late. Nothing serious, nothing reckless, just something to break up the routine. We met at my place while it was still light out, tossed our backpacks into the car, and drove out toward an abandoned quarry on the edge of the forest, about 40 minutes away. The quarry had a reputation. There'd been accidents there years ago, and a couple of people had died, but despite that, it was still a common hangout spot. People went there all the time for fires, drinks, and late-night conversations, and we'd never had any issues before. By the time we parked and walked in, the sun was already sinking low behind the hills, throwing that deep red-orange light across the trees. We grabbed as much firewood as we could find while we still had daylight, stacking it near the clearing so we wouldn't have to wander around later in the dark. Once the fire was going, the mood was good. We were laughing, sitting close to the warmth, getting ready to open the wine and settle in. That's when we realized none of us had brought a corkscrew. At first we tried to improvise, pushing and twisting at the corks, but quickly stopped before we ruined the bottles. They weren't cheap, and we'd already carried them all the way out there. Eventually it became obvious that someone had to go back and get one. After some back and forth, I volunteered, but only after setting two conditions. First, I wanted a hatchet to carry with me, just in case. Second, and more importantly, no messing around when I got back. No hiding, no jump scares, nothing. Both Mike and Paul agreed immediately. They handed me a flashlight, the hatchet, and sent me off. As I jogged through the trees toward home, I heard movement somewhere off to the side of the path. It sounded heavy, like something rooting through leaves. I remembered a conversation I'd had a few days earlier with an older hunter who mentioned wild boars becoming aggressive around that time of year, especially at night. That thought stayed with me the rest of the run, but nothing happened, and I made it home without incident. My mom was surprised to see me so soon. I explained what happened. She laughed, handed me the corkscrew, and I headed back out. On the return trip, I took a longer route through an open field instead of cutting back through the trees, figuring it was safer. When I finally reached the clearing again, something immediately felt wrong. The fire was still burning, bright and steady. Our backpacks were exactly where we'd left them, but Mike and Paul were nowhere in sight. I figured they were hiding, waiting to scare me, even though we'd agreed not to do that. Tired and annoyed, I sat down near the fire, facing the tree line, assuming that was where they'd be. I hadn't been sitting there long when I heard footsteps. Not running, not stumbling, just steady movement coming from the forest about 30 meters away. I raised the flashlight and aimed it between the trees. That's when I saw a tall figure standing there, wearing a dark hoodie. When the light hit him, he stopped completely and turned to face me. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the outline of his hood and shoulders. Thinking it was Paul trying to scare me, I yelled at him, telling him to knock it off and reminding him of our agreement. The figure didn't react. Instead, he turned away and walked deeper into the woods, disappearing into the trees. Right then, my phone rang. It was Mike. I answered angrily, accusing them of breaking the deal. There was a long pause on the line before Mike asked what I was talking about. I told him I'd just seen one of them in the woods. That's when his voice changed. He told me they were both at my house. They'd heard footsteps while waiting and assumed it was me trying to mess with them. When nothing happened, they got nervous and decided to go back. He'd left his phone at my place by accident, which was why they hadn't called sooner. I didn't believe him until I heard my mom's voice in the background asking what was going on. That's when everything dropped away. I realized I was alone. I ended the call quickly and shut off my flashlight, stepping away from the fire and backing up until I reached the rock wall at the edge of the clearing. I stood there in complete darkness, gripping the hatchet and trying to slow my breathing. Every sound felt amplified. I stayed there, barely moving, until what felt like forever passed. Eventually, I saw two faint beams of light approaching through the trees. Paul called my name. I've never been more relieved to hear anything in my life. When they reached me, we laughed out of pure nervous release, but none of us suggested staying. We packed up quickly, put out the fire, and left without looking back. The wine stayed unopened. We never went back there again. This happened when I was around 10 or 11 years old, sometime near the end of summer. I don't remember the exact year, but I do remember it was my birthday, September 1st, which always lined up with Labor Day weekend. Every year my family would go camping to celebrate, usually at a place called Agnes, somewhere in Central Oregon. It was kind of a tradition at that point, and it was always something I looked forward to. That night, it was already dark out, and my birthday party had wrapped up. I'd opened all my presents earlier, and the two I remember the most were a blanket that came with a stuffed animal and one of those kid laptops. It wasn't a real laptop, just something with built-in games, but at the time it felt like the coolest thing I'd ever owned. I was sitting inside my parents' tent, playing on it, completely focused. My little dachshund was curled up next to me, which made me feel better since my parents and grandparents weren't actually at our campsite. They were down the way at my aunt and uncle's site, drinking and talking. The only people still at ours were me, my brother, and my cousins Dylan and Wyatt. Dylan was asleep, snoring loud enough that I could hear him through the tent, and my brother and Wyatt were in the tent next to mine, just talking. At some point, I heard a dull thump hit the side of my tent. It was loud enough that it snapped my attention away from the game instantly. I assumed my brother was messing with me, so I laughed and told him to knock it off and go back to bed. Right after I said that, he answered back, confused, saying he hadn't touched my tent and that he and Wyatt had been inside the whole time. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I knew he couldn't have gone outside and come back without me hearing the zipper. I told him something had hit my tent, and he brushed it off, saying it was probably just a pine cone falling. That annoyed me more than it should have, mostly because I knew it didn't sound like that. So instead of letting it go, I decided to check for myself. I put on my boots and jacket, grabbed a lantern, and picked up my dog because I didn't want to go alone. As soon as I stepped outside, the campground felt quieter than it should have been. I walked around the tent, looking for anything that could have fallen or rolled into it, but there was nothing there. No pine cones, no branches, nothing that explained the noise. Then I walked behind the tent, toward the bushes. At first, I didn't see anything. My dog started barking suddenly, stiff in my arms, and that's when I noticed a face staring back at me from inside the brush. It was a grown man with long, greasy hair and a beard, close enough that I could make out his expression in the lantern light. My legs felt weak instantly, like they weren't going to work, but I turned and ran as fast as I could toward my aunt and uncle's campsite. I don't remember screaming until afterward, but I must have, because everyone was already getting up by the time I reached them. I told my dad what I'd seen, and he immediately grabbed a flashlight and headed back with the rest of the adults. When we got there, my brother and cousins were out of their tents, confused and scared. They searched the whole area but didn't find anyone. Afterward, my dad asked if I was sure about what I saw. Before I could answer, my brother said that after I ran off, he'd heard bushes moving behind the tent, and then footsteps running into the woods. That was enough to convince everyone it wasn't my imagination. Whoever that guy was, he scared me more than anything ever had up to that point. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. I'm just grateful he didn't try to follow me, because I don't want to think about what might have happened if he had. A couple of years back, my best friend and I decided we were overdue for another camping trip. We're the type who'd rather be out in the woods than sitting at home, so we usually manage a few trips every month, even in less than ideal conditions. Late November rolled around, and Virginia was already in one of those cold, damp moods it gets that time of year. Normally it would have just been the two of us roughing it, but this time our girlfriends surprised us by saying they actually wanted to come along. We joked about how most of our trips are miserable by normal standards. Mud, cold nights, no cell service, and that maybe they'd change their minds. But they didn't. So we packed up and planned a quick weekend away in the mountains. By the time Saturday evening came, the four of us were in the car heading a couple of hours west. The further we drove, the colder it got, and eventually rain started hammering down. My girlfriend shifted nervously in her seat, and I could tell she was second-guessing the idea of camping in freezing rain. My buddy and I, being used to this kind of thing, told them it was fine and we'd be warm soon enough once the fire was going. The spot we were heading to wasn't marked on any map. It was this overlook on the side of a mountain, with a steep hidden trail dropping down behind the rocks. You weren't supposed to camp there, but we'd been using that place for years. It was our little hideaway, just far enough off the beaten path that nobody ever stumbled across us. When we pulled up, though, night had already swallowed everything around us. You could see the city lights faintly in the distance, but the mountains themselves were just a wall of shadow. The rain hadn't let up, and the wind felt like it was slicing through every layer of clothing we had on. I unloaded my pack with my girlfriend and walked over to the start of the trail, figuring my buddy and his girlfriend were right behind us. After a couple of minutes, I realized they weren't coming. When I walked back to check, I found them standing by the car bickering. My buddy had somehow locked the keys inside. Now it's pouring rain, it's freezing, it's almost 10 at night, and we've got no way to call for help. The nearest town was at least 20 miles away, and our phones were useless out here. My girlfriend has a joint problem that flares up in the cold, and I could see how much she was struggling. I decided the best thing I could do was at least get her down to the bottom of the trail where we usually set up, so she could warm up by a fire while the others figured out the car situation. So we started making our way down. That descent is never easy even in daylight, but doing it in the dark with rain and fog felt like trying to walk down an ice-covered ladder. Our headlamps only made it harder because the mist just reflected the light right back into our eyes. We took turns, one of us carrying both sets of packs, while the other climbed down a few feet at a time, then handing gear back and forth. It was slow, careful progress, but we were moving. After about 20 minutes, we were close to the bottom when my girlfriend suddenly froze and said, "Do you see that?" I squinted through the fog and caught sight of a tarp spread out across the rocks below. At first, I thought we had lucked out, that someone had dropped it and we just scored a free piece of gear. I started working my way toward it, but then I noticed a grocery store basket sitting nearby. It looked like it was filled with snack wrappers. That stopped me cold, because there shouldn't have been any reason for something like that to be out here. My girlfriend whispered, her voice cracking, that it looked like someone might actually be lying under the tarp. I brushed it off, trying to convince both of us that no one could possibly be sleeping out here in these conditions. No tent, no fire, no car parked up top. It didn't make any sense. This wasn't the kind of place a through hiker or anyone homeless could survive, not in this weather, and not miles away from civilization. I told myself it had to be the wind tugging at the tarp. But then, as my headlamp swept across it, the tarp shifted. And then it shifted again. Not the wind. Someone was moving underneath it. My stomach dropped, and before I could even whisper a plan, my girlfriend bolted up the slope as fast as the rocks would let her. I turned my light off, crouched low, and just listened. I could hear whoever it was down there stirring, rocks crunching under their movements, slow but deliberate. I called out, trying to convince myself it might be someone lost or hurt. "Hey, do you need help?" The silence that followed was heavier than the rain. I tried again, nothing. Whoever it was had no interest in answering. That was all I needed to hear. I scrambled back up after my girlfriend, heart pounding. When we made it back to the car, she was in tears and I couldn't stop pacing. My buddy and his girlfriend were rattled after we told them what had happened. Now we weren't just stuck with a locked car. We had no idea who was down there or what they were doing. Eventually, he managed to get enough cell service to call a locksmith. The guy showed up after what felt like hours and immediately told us we should leave the area. He mentioned that strange things happen in those mountains, from hikers vanishing to bodies turning up. He didn't go into detail, but his point was clear. Nobody slept that night. We piled into the car once it was unlocked and drove all the way home in silence. I still catch myself replaying that moment when the tarp moved. What was that person doing there in the middle of nowhere, in the freezing rain with no gear? Why stay silent when someone offered help? I'll never know, but the memory still makes my skin crawl. Back when I was 13, my world revolved around a handful of really close friends. There were 5 of us in the group: me, Rose, Lynn, Zach, and Noah. We did everything together, from weekend road trips to late-night beach outings, and we all had this restless energy that made us think we were braver than we actually were. Noah's family had money, and with parents who weren't overly strict, we were constantly testing boundaries. That summer before 8th grade, we decided camping would be our next big adventure. The plan was to head out with Lynn's older sister Margot and Zach's older brother Todd, both of whom were 17. That gave us 7 people total, which seemed like the perfect number to pull off something exciting without any adult chaperones. We picked a forest about 20 miles from Noah's house, far enough to feel like we were really out there, but still close enough that it didn't feel impossible to get home if things went sideways. At least that's what we thought. Setting up camp was simple enough. We split into a girl's tent and a boy's tent, swam in a lake nearby, made dinner, and settled into that cliché camping routine of telling stories and roasting marshmallows. At some point, Margot stomped back from the girls' tent looking annoyed. She said someone kept brushing up against the side of their tent, dragging something along the fabric. None of us had left the fire, so it didn't make sense. Todd brushed it off, saying it was probably branches moving in the wind. Eventually, I went to bed with Rose and Margot, while Lynn was already passed out in the corner of the tent. I must have been asleep for only an hour or 2 before I woke up for no reason. The woods were dead quiet, but then I caught it. A faint tapping against the side of the tent, followed by this strange giggling. It wasn't the laugh of a kid. It was deeper, rougher, like a grown man trying to hold it back. I froze for a moment, convinced maybe I was hearing things, but the sound went on long enough to be real. I told myself it was just a branch scraping, or one of the guys screwing around, and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, we split into 2 groups. Margot, Lynn, Rose, and I went hiking, while the guys decided to stay back and fish. When we returned hours later, the campsite was eerily empty. Margot and Lynn went down to the lake to look for them, while Rose and I checked the tents. That's when my stomach dropped. Both tents had long, deliberate slashes in them, like someone had taken a knife to the fabric. Rose screamed, and when I looked closer, I could see how clean the cuts were. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't kids messing around. The others came running when they heard us yelling, but things went from bad to worse when Todd noticed his tires had been slashed too. With no cell service and only one other vehicle, we were stuck. Margot's car still worked, but it couldn't fit all of us with the gear inside. The plan was for her to drive Noah and Lynn back to town to get help, while the rest of us, Todd, Zach, Rose, and me, waited. None of us wanted to linger near the vandalized campsite, so we started walking toward the main road to make the pickup easier. About half an hour into the hike, I kept noticing sounds behind us, branches snapping in rhythm with our pace. I told Todd, and he started scanning the trees more carefully. Then, out of nowhere, he shouted for us to run. I looked back just long enough to see 3 massive figures charging toward us from the woods. They were tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark hoodies and masks that hid their faces. 2 of them were carrying knives, glinting in the daylight. We bolted. The sound of them crashing through the underbrush behind us was terrifying, and every step felt like we were seconds from being caught. By some miracle, we managed to outpace them. Eventually, the pursuit stopped, and when we glanced back, the men were gone. We didn't slow down until we reached the road, where Margot finally pulled up in her car. Later, when the police searched the area, they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone else being there besides our torn-up tents. We showed them pictures we'd taken at the lake, but it wasn't enough to prove what had happened. The whole experience left me with an uneasy realization. Sometimes people are more dangerous than the wilderness itself. Last summer was supposed to be this big send-off trip before all of us scattered for college. We'd been talking about it since senior year ended. One last time where it was just us, no parents, no responsibilities, just a little slice of freedom. Looking back, I wish we'd gone somewhere safer, but we were 17 and thought we were invincible. There were 6 of us, me and my girlfriend Stephanie, my buddy Brandon, and his girlfriend Kaylee, plus Steve and his girlfriend Sarah. Each couple had their own tent, and between the 6 of us, we had way more supplies than we actually needed. I was the Boy Scout of the group, so I made sure we had food, water, lanterns, the works. But we also showed up with coolers full of beer and a bag full of weed, because that's what we cared about more than anything. The drive out felt endless. We spent hours on back roads until we found a spot that looked perfect. Quiet woods with a few houses in the distance, but not so close that anyone would bother us. There was no cell service, which was annoying at first, but after a while we just shrugged it off. We set up camp, parked Steve's Honda Pilot close enough to keep an eye on it, and spent the first night exactly how you'd imagine, passing around a blunt, cracking open beers, laughing until we fell asleep in our tents. The next day we wanted to see what else was around, so me, Steve, and Sarah went wandering while Brandon and Kaylee stayed behind to do their own thing. We followed a trail not far from camp, and after 20 minutes, we stumbled on this old cemetery. It wasn't abandoned, though. There were flowers on some of the graves, little notes tucked into the headstones. It looked like people still came by to visit. Just past it, we noticed a wider dirt path with faint tire marks and a rough parking area, like something you'd see for a hiking spot. We didn't linger long. We spotted some deer, joked around a little, and eventually headed back. That evening we went harder than the night before, figuring we should burn through what we brought so we wouldn't have to haul it home. We drank, smoked, told stupid stories, and when we finally crawled into our tents, I thought we'd all just crash until morning. Instead, everything flipped upside down in seconds. I shot awake to Sarah's scream ripping through the campsite. Steve's tent was being slashed open from the outside, fabric tearing like paper. Steve swung his heavy flashlight at whoever it was and managed to fight him off long enough to get himself and Sarah into the car. They had the best shot since their tent was closest to it. The rest of us weren't so lucky. Our tents were set up farther back, closer to the tree line. I remember Stephanie clinging to my arm while Brandon and Kaylee scrambled out of theirs. Then Steve's voice cut through the chaos. He yelled, "Cemetery!" That's when it clicked. The trail past the cemetery was our only other way out, and if we could get there, maybe Steve could circle back. I grabbed Stephanie's hand, and the 4 of us sprinted into the woods. My phone light was the only thing guiding us, and yeah, it probably made us easier to spot. But the idea of missing that trail and ending up lost in the dark was worse. I could hear the guy behind us, crashing through the brush, not close enough to grab us, but close enough that every step felt like a countdown. We reached the cemetery and scrambled over the fence, huddling among the graves. I killed the light, and instantly the world went black. The silence was deafening except for the sound of my heart pounding. Then I heard it, the rattle of the fence as he climbed over. He'd followed us. His footsteps on the gravel were deliberate, slow, like he knew we were nearby and wanted us to hear him coming. That's when I remembered the pocket knife I always carried. Small, nothing special, but it was something. As his steps drew closer, I waited until I could practically feel him over me, and then I drove the knife into the back of his leg. He let out this awful scream and collapsed, dropping whatever weapon he had been holding. When it hit the ground, I realized it was a machete. The timing couldn't have been better. Steve's headlights cut through the trees as he pulled back around. We bolted from our hiding spots and sprinted for the car. I was the last one in, and as the light hit the guy, I caught a glimpse of him. Tall, broad shoulders, his face twisted with fury as he clutched his bleeding leg. That machete glinted beside him as Steve hit the gas and we sped off. The ride was a blur of sobbing, swearing, and heavy breathing. None of us knew what to say, so we didn't. We drove until we found the first house with a light on, and knocked like maniacs until an older couple answered. They didn't even ask questions, just ushered us in, gave us food, and offered their spare rooms. The next morning, the old man came with us, carrying his rifle, to grab what was left of our gear. The tents were shredded, but nothing was stolen. His wife had called the police while we were gone, and by the time we got back, officers were waiting. We gave our statements, but there wasn't much evidence for them to work with. We headed home later that day, quiet the whole ride back. None of us wanted to think about what had just happened, and even now, a year later, it rarely comes up when we talk. It feels like one of those things everyone wants to bury. I don't blame them. When I was a teenager, my summers almost always included camping trips with my family. We'd head out to White Lake State Park in New Hampshire, and it was the kind of place that made childhood feel like a movie. Days full of water balloon fights, rollerblades tearing down the paved paths, flashlight tag that went on until someone twisted an ankle, and cousins screaming at each other during Nerf battles. Those trips were the highlight of my year. Things changed when I got older, especially after my grandmother passed away. The big family gatherings slowed down and eventually stopped altogether. But there's one trip, one of the last ones we did, that's been burned into my memory for reasons I wish weren't so terrifying. I was 16 at the time. One night, while everyone was hanging out around the fire roasting marshmallows, my old prepaid track phone buzzed. It was a missed call from a friend. Since the campfire was loud and I wanted some privacy, I wandered off toward the edge of the campground. There was a narrow trail that ran past some empty sites, and I figured I'd just sit at one of the picnic tables where it was quiet. That part of the campground was deserted, and the only light came faintly from the bathrooms way up on the hill behind me. I dialed my friend back and we talked for a while, maybe 20 minutes, when I noticed movement on the road ahead. At first, it was just a dark outline slowly making its way down the road. It wasn't unusual to see campers going for a night stroll, so I didn't think much of it. But as the figure got closer, I realized the man didn't have a flashlight. Everyone brought one out at night, so that stood out immediately. I kept chatting into the phone, pretending not to notice, but I couldn't stop watching him. When he finally came close enough, I could make out his shape better. Tall, kind of heavy, with a light jacket hanging open. He looked like he was in his 30s or 40s. And then he stopped. Just stood there in the road, facing my campsite. I wasn't sure if he could tell I saw him, but we were locked into this weird silent standoff. I stopped listening to my friend completely and just stared back. Then he moved again. Only this time, it wasn't the casual pace of someone walking their dog or taking a stroll. He leaned forward slightly and started creeping toward me. Slow, careful steps, one after the other, like he didn't want me to hear him. The way he shifted his weight made it look like he was getting ready to lunge. That's when panic finally broke through. I jumped up from the picnic table and sprinted toward the trail that led back to my family's site. The sound of his footsteps came right after mine, fast, heavy, crushing leaves and snapping twigs. He was chasing me, no question. I tore down the path, branches whipping past my face, and then I heard him stumble. A branch cracked loudly, and he let out this grunt like he'd either tripped or slammed into something. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see his face. I just wanted distance between me and him. I kept running until the glow of our fire came into view. When I burst back into camp, I was a mess, crying, shaking, trying to explain what had just happened. My family listened, but instead of being alarmed, they brushed it off. My aunt suggested maybe it was some guy who thought I was someone else and was messing around. My cousin laughed and said the man probably gave up because he realized he had the wrong person and felt stupid. Within minutes, they were back to their jokes, the fire crackling like nothing had happened. I sat there in silence, trying to convince myself they were right. that maybe I was just overreacting. But even then, deep down, I knew what I saw wasn't innocent. That man wasn't out for a stroll, and he definitely wasn't approaching me by mistake. It's been years since that night, but it still sticks with me. I carry pepper spray and a personal alarm everywhere I go now, because once you experience something like that, you never forget how fast things can turn dangerous. Back in my late teens and early 20s, I spent a lot of time working at summer camps and outdoor education centers across Canada. Most of those seasons were in Ontario, but I did a short stint out west too. By then, I had years of camping, canoeing, and long leadership trips under my belt. So when I got my first chance to lead a group of teenage girls on a 2-week canoe trip through the Temagami region, I felt prepared. Nervous, sure, but ready. Temagami is this gorgeous stretch of lakes and forests tucked between Sudbury, Timmins, and North Bay. It's full of winding canoe routes, long portages, quiet islands, and some of the most breathtaking sunrises you'll ever see. The group I had with me was doing a classic route, starting around Whitefish Falls and ending 2 weeks later near Highway 11. We had the usual scrapes, blisters, and sunburns, but nothing out of the ordinary. By the time we were on the second to last night, the trip felt like it had gone by smoothly. That evening, we set up camp on the shore of a small island in Bear Lake. It was one of those free campsites, not an official park site with a fire pit or picnic table, just a patch of ground big enough for a few tents. Across the water, you could see the main island where most of the Bear Island First Nation community lives, but our spot felt pretty isolated. We ate, cleaned up, and went to bed early since we had a long paddle the next morning. Around 11 at night, I woke up to the low growl of a boat motor. At first I brushed it off. People used boats all the time out there. But it struck me as odd because it was late, and everything had been quiet for hours. The engine cut out not far from shore, and that's when I started hearing voices. A man and a woman, loud, angry, practically shouting over each other. I couldn't make out the words, but the fight carried clear across the lake. Then the woman screamed. It wasn't a startled sound. It was sharp, long, and terrified. Right after there was a splash, and then nothing. The silence was heavier than the yelling had been. I froze. My first thought was that I didn't want the girls to wake up, but I heard them whispering nervously inside their tent almost immediately. I was about to unzip my fly to check the water when everything around me lit up like a spotlight. A powerful beam swept across my tent, held for a moment, then shifted over to where the girls were sleeping. I whispered for them to keep still, my voice as calm as I could make it, even though my stomach was twisting. The light moved back to me, then back to them again, slow and deliberate. It went on like that for minutes that felt stretched thin, though in reality it probably wasn't more than 5. Then, just as suddenly, the beam snapped off and the boat engine roared back to life. The sound faded across the lake until it was gone. I stayed awake with the satellite phone in my lap, dialing the camp director as soon as I felt safe. He gave me the number for the local police detachment, and I relayed everything we'd heard and seen. They told me they'd forward it to the Bear Island Police, and that was the end of the call. None of us slept properly after that. At first light, I took a canoe out and searched the shoreline, half expecting to find someone who had managed to swim to land, or even debris floating. But the water was clear and still. Nothing. The girls didn't want to stay another night out there, and truthfully, neither did I. We cut the trip short and paddled straight to our pickup point a day ahead of schedule. Nobody said much on the way out, but I could tell we were all running the same thoughts in our heads. What had we just witnessed? And what would have happened if we'd made a sound when that light was on us? Years have passed, and I still replay it. When I've shared the story, plenty of people have been skeptical, like maybe I misheard or misinterpreted things. But that scream, the splash, and the way that light searched over our tents, there's no mistaking those. The scariest part is knowing there are dozens of cases of missing women in northern communities that never get solved or even properly reported. What we stumbled across that night might have been one of them. This happened just a week ago, and it's still stuck in my head. My parents drove me and my brother out to the campground with our two cousins and their dad. And because the girls refused to sleep in tents, we rented two little cabins right next to each other, so the whole crew could be near one another, which was perfect for us kids, because those cabins felt like our own little fortress. We rolled in Friday afternoon, hiked a bit, cooked on the grill, and did all the normal camping stuff until night. And the first shower run was totally uneventful because it was still light out, and my 17-year-old cousin drove the four of us, me, 14, my other cousin, 14, my brother, 13, and herself, over to the facilities. Everything felt fine and boring in that normal way that makes you grateful for boring nights. Saturday night was different because we stayed by the fire later and waited until about 9 to walk to the showers, which is basically walking into a tunnel of absolute black with only your phone flash to guide you. The shower building has 2 rows of 4 stalls facing each other, and we split up so the 3 of us kids could be close together with our brother and I taking the end stalls, which made sense in the dark and felt safer than wandering around alone. We were halfway through rinsing off when someone knocked on my stall door hard enough to make me yell that someone was in there, and I didn't hear an answer, just the faint echo of knocking from other doors. I thought maybe someone was just being an idiot and moved on with drying off. A few minutes later, my brother stepped out and told me he'd been waiting because it felt creepy outside, which I agreed with. And then we both noticed a car parked where there hadn't been one before, sitting with its lights off but close enough that you could make out its shape in the dim. A moment after that, another stall opened on the opposite row, and out came a man and a woman, both wearing black, both dripping like they'd just used the showers. But their hair looked perfectly dry and styled, like they'd stepped out of a salon rather than a wet stall. We waved because we were trying to act casual and not make the situation weird, and the woman laughed this loud, kind of throatier laugh that made my skin clench. They walked toward their car slowly, and I noticed the driver glance at us like he was sizing where we sat in the parking lot. Then the woman kept looking back at me with this blank stare that didn't feel like curiosity, and didn't feel friendly either. We told our cousin what we'd just seen as soon as she came out, and by the time we finished explaining, the pair was already backing out and pulling away, but they kept looking at us in the rearview mirror like we were a scene in the headlights. It hit us at once that knocking on all the stall doors while people were inside made no sense, unless whoever did it wanted to see if adults would answer, which suddenly made the whole encounter feel deliberate and predatory, instead of random and weird. The showers are loud from outside with water running and tiles echoing, so anyone standing out there would have known people were inside, which suggested that the knocking was a test to check for an adult presence before deciding whether to try something else. We all scrambled into the car, and my cousin drove us slowly back to the cabins, every one of us quiet and tense, each of us replaying the woman's laugh and the way both of them had watched us leave like it was a slow, calculated thing. We didn't tell our parents that night because kids don't want to freak out grown-ups, and because part of me felt embarrassed for being scared. But we talked about it for hours once the lights were off and the cabin was quiet. The consensus between us was that the pair saw my little brother as an easy target and knocked to check if an adult would show up, and they left because the other showers weren't clearing quickly enough, or because they realized it wasn't worth the risk. That thought made me feel sick to my stomach, because the whole exchange could have been a setup, and one small decision could have led to something awful. Since then, I've been replaying little details, wondering if we noticed anything else we should have, and hoping that whatever those people were looking for, they didn't find at that campground that night. A couple years back, my best friend and I were talking about how we hadn't gone camping in a while, and we figured it was time to get back out there. We usually try to make it out to the woods a few times a month. We're into the more primitive kind of camping. No amenities, no comfort, just you, your gear, and whatever the weather decides to throw your way. It was late November in Virginia, so we were looking at that coin flip where it's either unexpectedly nice or brutally cold, and of course, it turned out to be the latter. Despite the cold, our girlfriends had been bugging us to finally take them with us on one of these trips, even though we'd always warned them how miserable our idea of fun can be. But they insisted, and we were honestly kind of hyped they wanted to come. We figured, what the hell, maybe they'll enjoy the challenge. So Saturday comes around. We're all packed up and driving about 2.5 hours west into the mountains to this spot we call our secret site. It's not officially on any map, more like one of those scenic roadside overlooks that people pull into to admire the view. But it has a trail, and I say that word lightly, leading down to a rocky drop-off where we usually set up camp. As we got closer, the rain started, and the temperature kept dropping. I could tell my girlfriend was already uneasy, especially since it was getting dark fast. But we kept assuring her that we'd done this plenty of times and everything would be fine. By the time we arrived, it was already dark. The only view was of the city lights twinkling in the distance, and the wind had picked up enough to make it feel like it was cutting straight through our clothes. I'd say it was hovering just above freezing, about 34 degrees or so, and that rain had turned to a mist that just clung to everything. The girls had definitely lost that spark of excitement they had earlier. Our secret spot required some effort to reach. There's a steep, sketchy rock scramble that drops probably 75 feet from the overlook to this flat area below. It's not a marked trail, more like something high schoolers use to sneak off and smoke without getting caught. And yeah, we weren't technically supposed to camp there, but being young and dumb, that never stopped us before. So I get my gear out, and my girlfriend and I head to the edge of the trail to start making our way down, while my friend and his girlfriend are still gathering their stuff. We wait for a bit, and after a few minutes, we're wondering what's taking them so long. It's cold, wet, and we're both getting annoyed. Eventually, I hike back to the car to check on them, and that's when I hear them arguing. Turns out, my buddy had locked the damn keys in the car. Great. 10 at night, raining, freezing, and now we're stranded in the middle of nowhere with no cell signal and no easy way out. I head back over to my girlfriend and tell her what's up. She's got a joint condition that acts up in cold, damp weather, and I can tell she's starting to hurt. So I yell to my buddy that we're going to start heading down to get a fire going so she can warm up, and I'll come back up afterward. We switch on our headlamps and begin carefully working our way down the slippery slope. It's brutal. The mist makes it almost impossible to see. It reflects off the light and blinds you instead of helping. We have to work in this weird leapfrog system. She hands me her gear, climbs down to me, takes mine, I go further down, rinse and repeat. It's exhausting and painfully slow, but we're getting there. We're about 10 minutes from the bottom, where we usually pitch our tent, when she suddenly stops and says, "What's that?" There's tension in her voice that makes me instantly alert. I look where she's pointing, and through the fog, I can barely make out what looks like a tarp. My first thought? Score! Free tarp! I figured it must have blown off someone's sight and just landed there. Maybe they never came back to get it. But as I get closer, I spot something weird. A plastic handheld shopping basket, the kind you get at grocery stores. It looked like it had a bunch of snack wrappers in it. My girlfriend's eyes are wide, and she whispers, "Is that a person under the tarp?" I tried to laugh it off and told her there's no way. I mean, we're out in the middle of nowhere, in freezing rain, halfway down a rocky cliff. There's no trail access, no fire, no gear, no sign of anyone else being out here. This is not a place where someone just camps casually. Definitely not a homeless person, and no way a through hiker. We're nowhere near a through trail, store, or road. I creep closer, mostly to prove to her it's nothing and we're just spooking ourselves. My light shines directly on the tarp. It shifts. I freeze. Maybe it's the wind. I glance back at her. She's already backing up slowly. I turn back toward the tarp and it shifts again, bigger this time. There's a person under there. They're waking up. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the rain. I whisper, "Run!" But she's already scrambling up the rocks. I yell again just to be sure she's moving, then turn and bolt after her. As I pause for a moment halfway up, I turn off my light and listen. I can hear the shifting of stones. This person is now walking around, fully awake. No fire, no light, just moving in the dark. Still trying to keep a rational mind, I call out, asking if they're okay or if they need help. Nothing. Not a single word back. I ask again. Silence. That was it for me. We scrambled back up to the top, where my friend and his girlfriend are still huddled near the car, freaked out about the keys. We tell them everything, and now they're panicking too. It's raining harder now, and we end up setting up a makeshift tarp shelter and just sitting under it, shivering and waiting while my buddy hikes around trying to get signal. I couldn't stop staring at the trailhead, half expecting this silent stranger to come crawling up after us. Eventually, thank God, he gets enough signal to call a locksmith, and when the guy shows up and we tell him what happened, he just goes pale and says, "Y'all need to get out of here, now." Apparently, he'd lived in the area his whole life and told us about weird disappearances, unsolved hiker murders, basically, local legends no one likes to talk about. He said some people just vanish out here, and some people hide out here for a reason. We didn't even hesitate. We got in the car and drove all the way home that night. No camping, no sleep, just silence and headlights. To this day, I still think about that night, about that person under the tarp. What were they doing out there? Were they hiding, running, planning something? It still messes with my head. There was no way they could have survived out there in those conditions without gear, and we never heard a single word from them, just silence in the dark. It was the first time I truly understood that, in the wild, people can be the scariest thing out there. I look back now and realize how reckless I was. I never should have taken my girlfriend to an illegal site, in the cold, with no communication and no real plan. I let my own ego and comfort with the outdoors blind me to how dangerous it could actually get. That night could have ended a lot worse. It changed how I approach every trip now. We never went back. This happened a few years back, when I was 13. At that time, I was in this tight-knit group with 4 of my best friends, Noah, Zach, Rose, and Lynn. We were that crew who always had something going on, whether it was beach trips, random road trips, or pitching tents in some remote spot just for the thrill of it. Noah's family had money, and our parents were all pretty chill, so they never really gave us a hard time about going off on our little adventures. It was the summer right before 8th grade, and we decided to do a proper camping trip before school started back up. Now, this wasn't just the 5 of us. Lynn's older sister Margot came along, and Zach's older brother Todd tagged in too, both 17. So we were a group of 7. Me, Zach, and Lynn were 13. Rose and Noah were 14, and the 2 older siblings were kind of the responsible ones, in theory. We found this spot out in the woods about 20 minutes from Noah's place, super remote, barely any trails, and absolutely no phone service. The kind of place you pick when you want to feel like you're really off the grid. Everything went pretty smoothly at first. We set up 2 tents, girls in one, boys in the other, and spent the afternoon swimming in this nearby pond, cooking over a fire, and doing all the cheesy camp stuff like roasting marshmallows and telling half-baked ghost stories. Eventually, Margot and Lynn decided to crash early, and the rest of us stuck around the fire, messing around and telling stupid jokes. A little while later, Margot comes stomping back from the tent looking annoyed. She said someone was running their hand or something along the side of their tent. None of us had moved from the fire, and the tents weren't that close, so it wasn't any of us. Todd was like, "Relax, probably just a tree branch." And Margot rolled her eyes and went back. Rose and I figured we might as well get some sleep too, so we left the boys and crawled into the tent. Lynn was already passed out, and the rest of us settled in, Me closest to the front, Rose beside me, and Margot next to Lynn at the far end. I fell asleep pretty quick, but a few hours later, around 2:15, I remember checking my phone. I shot awake for no obvious reason. I was just lying there, eyes adjusting to the pitch black, wondering what the heck woke me up. Then I heard it. This slow tapping on the outside of the tent, followed by a weird giggle. It didn't sound like any of the guys. It was a deeper voice, but not like full-grown man deep. The sound stopped after a bit, and I just convinced myself I was overthinking it. Maybe I was half dreaming or something. Either way, I managed to fall back asleep. Next morning, we decided to go hiking. To keep our stuff safe, we split up. Margot, Lynn, Rose, and I went off on the trail, and the guys stayed behind to fish and watch the camp. We were gone for about 2 hours, and when we got back, the boys were nowhere in sight. Margot grumbled and took Lynn down to the lake to hunt them down, while Rose and I went to check on the tents. And that's when everything went from chill to straight-up nightmare. Our tents were torn to shreds, like not just ripped, but slashed with something sharp. I got up close and saw the cuts, small, precise slices, definitely done with a pocket knife or something like it. Our tents were made from heavy-duty fabric too, so whatever did this took effort. Rose was freaked out, and honestly, I wasn't feeling much better. We yelled for the others and they came running. Things got worse when Todd checked his car and realized someone slashed his tires too, and we had no signal, no way to call for help. The only decent news? Margot's car was fine. She had just enough space to take Lynn and Noah back into town to get help. She promised to call 911 and come back for the rest of us. While we waited, Todd, Zach, Rose, and I started walking down the long dirt path toward the main road to save time. None of us wanted to be anywhere near that site. We figured we'd meet Margot halfway or something. Rose and Zach both had phones still working, so they were tracking how far we walked. After about 30 minutes, I started hearing twigs snap off to the side, deeper in the woods. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was animals, or maybe my imagination playing games. But then I told Todd, and I could see him start glancing around more often. That tension in the air just kept building. And then, boom, Todd yells, "Run!" I turned to look and froze. 3 massive dudes in dark hoodies were coming at us from the woods. 2 had knives. They looked huge, like all over 6 feet tall, easily over 200 pounds, and they were wearing masks, like actual ski masks. It felt surreal, like we were suddenly in a horror movie, but this was real, in broad daylight. We all took off running. I don't know how long we sprinted, but it felt like forever. Eventually, either they gave up or got bored because we didn't see them anymore. We made it to the main road, still on edge, glancing over our shoulders every few seconds. Eventually, Margot pulled up, and I've never been so relieved to see a beat-up Subaru in my life. The police were called, and they searched the area, but they didn't find a thing. No footprints, no torn tents, nothing. Just our photos from earlier and some gear, like we were never there. To this day, I have no idea what those guys wanted. Maybe it was just to scare us. Maybe it was worse. I think about it all the time, like what if we'd stayed behind? What if we hadn't started walking early? We weren't exactly a tough group, just a bunch of lanky teens who got lucky. I still go camping, but never without service, never without an adult, and never, ever at that spot again. Back in the summer of 2016, my wife and I were riding high on post-wedding bliss. We'd been together for over a decade, and throughout those years, one of our favorite things to do was pack up the dogs and head to the mountains. Sometimes it was just rustic camping under the stars, and other times we splurged on cozy lodges with fireplaces and ski slopes just outside. So naturally, when it came time to plan a honeymoon, there was no question. We booked ourselves a 20-day mountain camping trip across the country, loaded up the car, tossed in the pups, and hit the road for what we thought would be the most peaceful trip of our lives. And at first, it really was. The air was fresh, the trees towered above us, and after 2 days of solid driving, we arrived and set up camp like seasoned pros. By day 3, we were already that couple at the campground, the ones with the perfectly set up site that newbies kept wandering over to for advice or spare supplies. We didn't mind. We've always been happy to lend a hand, whether someone needed a fire starter or forgot their sugar. But then, things took a turn. It was around the 4th or 5th day when she showed up. I say she because to this day, we never did get her name. My wife and I were sitting beneath a tall pine, playing cards and enjoying a couple cold beers when, bam, there she was. No footsteps, no warning, just there. "Can I pet your dog?" she asked out of nowhere. Even the dogs hadn't sensed her approaching, and they immediately freaked out, barking and growling like she'd dropped out of the sky. I politely told her it wasn't a good idea, and instead of leaving, she just stood there. Didn't talk, didn't smile, didn't even look directly at us, just loitered on the edge of our sight like she forgot what she came for. After a few awkward minutes, she turned and walked off. Now, I've worked with folks who've had serious brain injuries, so I try not to jump to conclusions when someone acts a little off. But still, this lady had my attention. I watched as she walked into a nearby campsite a few plots down from ours, where a small tent was already pitched. She pulled out another, smaller tent from her backpack and started setting it up. I recognized that campsite. 2 girls had set up there the day before, but today, they were nowhere in sight. The next morning, I was headed to the showers when I saw her again. She was sitting in her tent with the flap open, reading a book. Didn't think much of it. But on my way back, the tent flap was closed, but rustling like someone was definitely inside. And just as I was passing, she unzipped it, and boom, there she was, completely naked, not even trying to be subtle. She stretched like she was doing a yoga pose meant to seduce wildlife, arms up, chest out, and even let out this exaggerated moan that made me think I was suddenly in a very weird European art film. I awkwardly walked past and told my wife about it when I got back. We laughed it off, kind of unsure what to make of it. Later that day, we hiked to this awesome waterfall nearby. It was a bit of a trek, but worth every step. As we were taking in the view and snapping pictures, guess who appears out of the trees behind us? Yep, her. At first, I thought maybe it was just a coincidence. Popular trail, lots of campers, but the way she just froze and stared when she saw us? Nope, that was not normal. I turned to my wife and said, "I think we've got a stalker." She turned to look and instantly got that same uneasy vibe. So we kept hiking, trying to ignore it, but she was always right there behind us, never catching up, never falling behind. Our youngest dog wouldn't stop looking back at her, clearly uneasy. Eventually, I suggested we stop for water and let her pass. She didn't. She stopped too, just stood there again. That was it. We both agreed to cut the hike short and take the quick loop back. Every time we turned a corner, we jogged a bit to put some distance between us. Eventually, we lost her. That night, my wife went to take a shower and came back with more weirdness. Apparently, the woman was in the bathroom with the 2 girls from the campsite, the ones who originally set up where she pitched her tent. My wife noticed pretty quickly that the girls didn't really know her. She was clearly trying to tag along with them on a night out to the nearby ski town, and they were just entertaining her, probably to get rid of her. They told her to meet them at a restaurant that had already closed. Basically, they were ditching her. As soon as she left, the girls were in the bathroom laughing about it, making fun of her like mean kids at a school lunch table. My wife, being the kind of person who doesn't put up with that nonsense, even toward a creep, called them out. That's when the girls admitted that she'd basically just moved into their sight while they were gone, and they didn't know how to kick her out without causing drama. That night, around 3 a.m., we were jolted awake by a scream. Not just any scream, this high-pitched, bone-chilling shriek that sounded like someone being attacked. The dogs lost it. My wife was shaking. I peeked out the trailer window and there she was, standing dead still outside our sight, not moving an inch. Even though I only cracked the window cover a tiny bit, it felt like she was staring right into my soul. After what felt like forever, she just turned and walked off. That whiskey nightcap was definitely earned. The next day, our friends arrived from the city. We were excited to have a normal weekend. But no more than 15 minutes into setting up, there she was again. Bam, right in our campsite. She asked, again, if she could pet the dog. This time, the dog was barking like crazy, and I told her flat out it wasn't a good idea. She just stood there, silent. Then she noticed my friend's tent and mentioned it was the same model as hers, just bigger. He wasn't having any of it and gave her a dry, cool. Then she tried to help set it up, grabbing his hammer and pegs like she was invited. He asked for them back. She stared like a full-on slasher villain, then suddenly dropped everything and sprinted off into the woods. That's when I filled in our friends on the week's events. They were just as creeped out as we were. Later that night, she came back one more time, this time with a new pitch. "You've got lots of room in that camper," she said. "Maybe I could stay with you guys tonight. We'd have some fun." My friend, tipsy from a full day of beers, didn't skip a beat. "Did you just propose a gangbang?" I was sitting there, glass of whiskey in hand, just stunned. She looked straight at me, grinned, and said, "I like your friend." Then she turned and disappeared into the night, like some weird camping-themed ghost. When we went to clean up for bed, my wife pointed out her campsite. It was trashed. Garbage and clothes thrown everywhere, and her tent? Gone. She had vanished, leaving the place looking like a bear had hosted a party. A park ranger was doing rounds nearby, so we told him the whole story. He said he'd look into it. We didn't see her again until the final day. There's this lookout point near our site, perfect for watching the sunset over the valley. We were up there enjoying the view when my wife saw something through the camera lens. Her, standing halfway down the slope, just watching us. She climbed up, sat silently on a rock next to us, and didn't say a word. My wife gave me a sly look and asked me to take a picture of the sunset, making sure the woman would be in frame. Just in case, you know. We got our last look at the mountains, packed up the next day, and left without any more sightings. Looking back, we both agreed something was seriously wrong with her. Socially off was one thing, but the stalking, midnight howls, the staring, and that weird final encounter, that was something else. At times it felt like she was seconds away from snapping, and not just mentally. I've never been more relieved to leave a campsite in my life. So a while back, maybe 3 or 4 summers ago, my buddies and I decided to do our annual guys camping trip. It's something we've done since high school. Just me, Ryan, Marcus, and Joel, out in the woods somewhere with no cell service, no responsibilities, and way too much beer. That year, we had just wrapped up college and wanted to celebrate with one last, no worries, just vibes weekend before real life hit us. We picked a remote patch of forest in southern Oregon, somewhere off the grid, not an official campground, just nature in its rawest form. The first day, man, it was awesome. We got the tent set up, collected a bunch of firewood, grilled some burgers, and even managed to fish a bit, though none of us caught anything worth bragging about. Once the sun dipped down behind the trees, we lit up a fire, roasted marshmallows like kids, and cracked open a ridiculous amount of beer. It was honestly the perfect kind of day where your only concern is whether your marshmallow's gonna catch fire. We all passed out full and buzzed, with the fire dying out as the stars came out. Next day followed the same blueprint, bit of hiking, exploring random trails, telling dumb stories from college, and eating like we hadn't seen food in weeks. But that night, That's where things got different. We were winding down by the fire, and Marcus brought up this creepy camping video he'd seen on YouTube. Some story where these campers kept hearing laughter in the middle of the night, but no one could figure out where it came from. I remember joking. Bet it was just some drunk raccoon with jokes. Yeah, not so funny in hindsight. Later that night, we were messing around, fake wrestling near the fire like a bunch of idiots. At one point, Ryan just stops cold, like mid-laugh, full stop, and stares into the trees behind me. We're all like, "What's up?" And he says, "I swear I just heard something over there." I figured it was probably just some animal. I mean, we're out in the woods. Raccoons, squirrels, deer. It's their home. But Ryan looked genuinely weirded out, which kind of made me nervous too. I tried to lighten the mood by tackling him into the dirt, and everyone just laughed it off again. It kind of faded into the background, until about 10 minutes later. We were wiped by then and decided to kill the fire and hit the tent. We had one of those big family-sized tents, the kind you can actually stand in, so we were all piled in there together. Just as we turned off our lantern, I heard this low, raspy chuckle, like someone trying to hold in a laugh but failing. I assumed it was Joel, because he'd been giggling at literally everything since dinner. I turned my flashlight toward him, expecting to catch him mid-laugh, but instead, he looked freaked out, like pale, wide-eyed, not faking it freaked out. He whispered, "You guys heard that, right?" And I said, "The laughing?" Marcus chimed in, "Wait, that wasn't you?" That's when we all kind of realized something was seriously off. We shuffled around and settled into the tent. I reached under my sleeping bag and grabbed the hatchet we'd used for chopping firewood earlier. Didn't exactly have a lot of weapons out there, but that thing felt like a lifesaver. I was at one end of the tent. Joel and Ryan were in the middle, and Marcus was at the other end. None of us said a word, but you could feel it. None of us were asleep. It didn't help that we were deep in the woods, not at any established site. No rangers, no other campers, just us, and about a mile hike back to the car, with barely any signal unless you climbed a tree and waved your phone around like a lunatic. The realization kind of hit that if someone was out there, we were pretty screwed. At some point, I guess I drifted off, but I shot awake when I heard that same creepy laugh again. Only this time, it sounded closer. Too close. It wasn't a chuckle anymore. It was like this weird, throaty giggle that felt like it was coming from just outside the tent wall. I froze. Didn't even turn my head. I just stared straight up at the ceiling of the tent, heart pounding, clutching that hatchet like it was a teddy bear. Then, out of nowhere, a shadow moved across the side of the tent, and what looked like a finger. It started slowly tracing circles on the fabric of the tent, just gliding along, as if whoever was out there knew exactly how freaked out we were. That finger made its way around the side of the tent, and when it got to the entrance, everything went dead quiet, like the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Then, all at once, the whole tent shook violently, and this voice, low but loud, yelled "Wocka, Wocka, Wocka," like some freak show muppet on drugs. Joel screamed louder than I've ever heard a man scream, and right after, whoever it was outside let out this long, wheezy laugh and walked off like they were just going for a stroll. We didn't sleep after that, not even close. We just laid there, holding our breath every time a twig snapped. It was probably the longest night of my life. By the time the sun came up, we didn't even talk. We just started packing, took down the tent, shoved everything into backpacks, and made the hike back to the car without a single joke or smart remark. We still do camping trips every year, but you better believe we go to actual campgrounds now, with lights, people, and sometimes even a ranger station nearby. And these days, I don't just bring a hatchet. I've got a Judge revolver with me every time, just in case. I'll never really know if it was a psycho playing games or just some local pulling a prank. But either way, I'm not taking chances like that again.